Good afternoon. This is the Ways and Means Committee resuming on Bill 22-0235, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending in June 30th, 2023. We will now be hearing from the Mayor's Office of Performance and Innovation. Mr. Hamwitz, if you want to take it away and present your slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of the Council, my name is Dan Heimowitz. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Performance and Innovation. Just to start with a quick overview about what the Office of Performance and Innovation does, or OPI as I'll be calling it. There's three complementary parts of the office. There's first CityStat, which uses data to review and analyze agency performance towards measurable goals for Mayor Scott's top priorities. The Data Fellows program is a complementary initiative through which data analysts are embedded within city agencies to help them improve how they're using data. And the innovation team uses tools including data, but also human-centered design to work together with city government colleagues, but also community members to develop new approaches to big city challenges. So I'll say a bit about the past year and also what's ahead for us in fiscal 2023. It's been a particularly important time for our work, in part because of the added energy for bringing data into the heart of everything we do in our government under the leadership of Mayor Scott and CAO Shorter. And just to note that in addition to our core data work, our office is often the go-to for various other types of critical coordination and support to the rest of government. So for example, a big one from the past budget year is how we led the coordination of developing the Mayor's Strategic Action Plan, which was a city government-wide effort to basically orient the administration around a clear set of actions for the rest of the first term. So that's a good example of sort of a major effort where OPI is being asked to kind of play a key coordinating role across government. So talking about the different parts of our office, there's, as I mentioned, the CityStat and Data Fellows, which are complementary programs. So, I mentioned the re-energized use of data and use of CityStat by our city leaders. In addition to that, earlier this year, Baltimore was awarded silver status by What Works Cities, which evaluates cities across the world and how they are using data. And that recognition from Baltimore was our best ever recognition in terms of how we're doing. So again, good to see that sort of a neutral outside party is making that observation. And I also pleased that over the past few months, in particular, we've been able to have opportunities to provide some additional visibility into our work with the City Council, including a presentation at a council lunch, and more recently at the State of Stat hearing. So, pleased for the opportunity for that added engagement and looking forward to that to the year ahead. Looking at the work of CityStat, what is the focus in this administration? I think I'd highlight a few key things about how we're working. So first of all, in a lot of ways, we're getting back to basics, focusing on accountability. An example of that is the renewed use of inspections, complementing our quantitative analysis with actually sending out a staff member to observe work in the field, documenting it, and bringing into those stat discussions, which is, I think a really good example of that work. We're also, I think another key piece has been the level of engagement that we are seeing from the mayor and his leadership team, including the city administrator. And again, we're talking about the actual direct involvement in these processes, in these meetings, using the data and using these processes, the CityStat processes, as a management tool for government. And then the other thing I'll note is that, as we talked about in our recent State of Stat hearing, the CityStat is one key part of an overall set of data and performance initiatives, and increasingly the expanded use of data for performance within city agencies. So again, that's sometimes in the form of an agency running their own internal stat, and we welcome that. We also support sometimes the development of those processes. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the current and upcoming stat processes for the fiscal year ahead. But briefly on the Data Fellows program, as I mentioned, it's a complementary program to CityStat. If CityStat's about data for performance management, the Data Fellows are data analysts who are working directly with agencies or developing specific data products or projects. So some examples of key projects from the past year include building a dashboard for Baltimore's 911 diversion program, which will launch publicly in the next few weeks. We're really excited about that. And also developing the tracker through which the public can follow this administration's progress towards implementing the strategic action plan, which I talked about earlier. These data fellows are also, in many ways, the sort of next wave of data talent working throughout government. To date, fellows have worked with 8 city agencies, including DOT, the Fire Department, Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, and increasingly we're seeing those fellows graduating into more senior data roles throughout government. I mentioned just briefly about sort of stats that we have been doing that we'll be continuing. They've included stats focused on policing, city cleanliness, city inspections, and the timeliness of invoice payments. Looking to the year ahead, I also wanted to flag a couple things that are in the works. One is some work we're doing with the Fire Department around the use of their EMS system, and that is through our Data Fellows program, but it will also probably include a stat process through which we will be looking at the efficiency and how equitable the service of our EMS system is, and we'll be looking for ways to use data to support improvements to the system. So excited for the launch of that and that continuing collaboration with the EMS team. We'd previously been talking a bit about something called neighborhood stat. We're now seeing that more as the data component of the soon-to-be relaunched neighborhood subcabinet to ensure that there's a clear and consistent data grounding to that process when that relaunches. So those are a couple new things that are happening, and there are a couple other areas which we are also exploring as far as the fiscal year ahead. Two additional things that are not themselves stats. One, which the city administrator mentioned in his budget hearing at the start of this week, is the development of something we're calling the performance management system, which is a way, really a complementary process to what we do in these stat meetings. So this will be an annual process of city agencies establishing performance plans, which will include metrics and targets for their key services, and reporting out on that performance at 2 times per year. And again, the public will be able to see that, track and follow that progress. And again, the reason we see that as complementary, that's going to be broad and comprehensive in the sense that it will cover all city agencies, in contrast to CityStat, which is, really deep and focused analysis around a few particular focus issues. The other area, new sort of initiative, which is not a stat but sort of relates to this, is we're working with BBMR to reintroduce something the city used to do, which is a Baltimore community survey to gauge resident perspectives on a range of issues, including preferences and satisfaction with city services. And so that will be, I think, really important, a really important new process, and also eventually a data set which itself will inform stats and metrics within the performance management system. So I'm looking forward to that. And then finally, I've been talking about the data parts of our office, or the data focus parts of our office, the CityStat team and the Data Fellows program. I also want to talk about the innovation team, which works on specific projects and challenges defined by the mayor and other city leaders. So in recent months, that has included the continued support to the city's COVID response, including developing the city's main COVID communications campaign in-house. Baltimore versus COVID. You've probably seen some of the advertisements around the city, on billboards, on TV. The team did a lot of work a lot of research and design work to create the foundations for that campaign. So there's that. I'm glad that our colleagues from MEMA just presented right before this hearing. The innovation team worked in collaboration with MEMA to develop the language access toolkit, which was just discussed, and again, that will be launching soon. And it's going to be a way to help city agencies ensure that they're providing cultural and linguistic connected customer service to all city residents. The current work of the innovation team is a collaboration with the Mayor's Office of Broadband and Digital Equity to ensure a positive user experience for residents as the city undertakes the major expansion of public Wi-Fi locations throughout the city. So again, a lot of the team's work is, research into through a variety of methods, including engaging residents to understand what are preferences, what are concerns, what are they looking for in this new service. So that processes include touch points with over 700 residents, including roughly half of which are from West Baltimore. And that's been for a variety of methods: surveys, interviews, canvassing, a pop-up event at Shake and Bake. So that's going to result in essentially what is a playbook or a plan for the Mayor's Office of Broadband and Digital Equity related to key aspects of the user experience of this service. Some of those things that the team will provide some support in developing. For example, some of the brand and digital asset development associated with this service. But in terms of other things such as a plan for community engagement, that'll be something that is basically a roadmap that the expanded Office of Broadband and Digital Equity will be able to take forward. But again, this is a major new service for the city, a really important initiative, and so to me, a great fit for the team's human-centered design, tools, and approaches to ensure that this is going to be a resident-friendly service. So also exciting there. So that's a bit of a look of current work and what's ahead for OPI in this upcoming budget year, and I'll leave it there. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. So last year, you guys saw a 60+% budget increase. That was done at a time when a lot of other agencies were being asked how they can cut back a little bit. So have you guys, done 60% more work this year? Have you guys, can you talk to us a little bit more about some of the things that you've done to help the city become more than $1.7 million more efficient than we were the year before?
Councilman, I appreciate the question. Previously, the city stat budget and the innovation team budget were separate, were listed separately. And so the total for the combined office in fiscal 22 was a decrease from fiscal 22 when you consider, it was the first time the budget was integrated. And you'll see there's, it's even a slightly smaller number proposed for this fiscal year compared to FY22.
Yeah, I was just looking at it says FY21 actual, FY22 budget at 60% more. But if you're saying you combined the offices and that's what, that's why it's like that. That's fine. So, can you just talk to us about some specific tangible things that we can touch and say, here in this division of this agency, you guys did this that was innovative and it has saved the city more than $1.7 million last year?
Appreciate the question. So again, in terms of the innovation team's work, that and there is the innovation fund, which is specifically focused on new approaches that are going to lead to cost savings. That's not necessarily what the innovation team part of OPI is being asked to work on. So, when I'm talking about this flagship, COVID communications campaign, public communications campaign, that's it's not a cost saving. The innovation is around the research and the way we're bringing resident perspectives and residents into the actual into the campaign itself. I think that was a hugely creative and innovative campaign that I think the city has a lot to be proud of. I know it's not a quote unquote.
Which campaign was that? Was that the one that
Baltimore
with the health
versus-
department with?
Yeah, in collaboration with the health department. It's Baltimore versus COVID. Let's win this together was the tagline. And again, you saw it on billboards. You may have seen the main flagship video ad, aired on TV throughout the NFL playoffs, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, look, I went to business school. I, had a concentration in marketing. I think there were some things that were good about that campaign. There was also some things that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Some of the ads that were out on certain bus stops and billboards and stuff. But I already have taken that up with the health department. I'm past that already. But I guess I'm a little confused because some of the, with your presentation, you're talking a lot about, marketing and some of those other things. But and I know we've discussed this before, but the office is performance and innovation. And so to me, to many people who are watching this, they're probably assuming that this office is in charge of innovating city government, and you can literally close your eyes and throw a ball and hit an inefficient practice in just about every agency. And so there's a lot we can innovate. There's a lot of opportunity to improve, and so you guys are that. So I understand you're tasked with what you're tasked with, but have you been tasked with anything in the fiscal year budget 2022 that helped an agency of the city become more innovative and increase their performance, and in turn justified why we spent $1.7 million on this office? I just wanted to, just an example. I understand you guys did work. I understand you came to work and you worked on projects. I get that. I'm looking on the cost savings, and I'll give an example. The OIG was with us yesterday. They have a multi-million-dollar budget as well, and one of the things they start with is, we've saved the city by uncovering waste and abuse. We've saved the city a lot more than we've cost the city, and therefore we need a little bit more money to do a little bit more. And so you guys are certainly you're not too small. I mean, $1.7 million is a lot of money. I just want to know, how we how this office has given us a return on investment.
No, understood. It's a great question. We, again, so we've been talking a little bit, and maybe I should move on to some of the other things the office has worked on. The innovation team's work has not really related to that type of, innovation that is about cost savings to city government. In general, our city stat process is about looking at the performance of service delivery, whether the quality and the quantity and the timeliness of service is actually happening. There are times that we are asked to look at things that are more of a sort of finance or cost kind of nature. So for example, in police stat, we routinely review the police department's use of overtime. And to me, that's been one area of pretty notable improvement in recent years. So the use of OT by the police department is lower in this fiscal year. We're concluding now than it has been in the past. So when you look at the last 2 years compared to say fiscal 19, this is an area of pretty big improvement. I'm not saying that police stat is the whole answer to that, but I do think the discipline of the stat process where you're reviewing that data, you're unpacking the usage by unit, by different parts of the department, forcing the agency to think hard about how it's using that is an example of how our process contributes to cost savings. But again, in general, in our stats, that's not the majority of the focus. The majority of the focus is around, for the services that are being provided, to what extent are they being provided in a, again, timely, efficient, equitable way.
Okay, so you're talking about service delivery. So, what can you give me an example of? A couple service delivery improvements that have been made, even if it wasn't cost savings, things that you guys worked on this past year to improve the service delivery of a city function to our constituents?
Yeah. So, I'll use an example from the our clean stat process. During the off season leading into this growing season, we have been working closely with agencies to strengthen and codify their own quality assurance processes around mowing and grounds maintenance. Again, that's to ensure that they have clear systems across the board for the different agencies for holding their own staff accountable for work, but also the vendors that conduct some of the work. That is a lot of work that went into the before the growing season. It is still early in the growing season, but I am hopeful about some of the improvements that all of that process work that we did as the city stat team in collaboration with those agencies will have related to mowing.
Okay, and then one last thing on that. So on the clean stat front, were you aware that DPW was performing street sweeping in one area in the city and not the rest of the city for the past 6 months since December? Just to give you some background, when DPW was here for their hearing, we were talking about street sweeping and recycling for obvious reasons, and we were made aware that street sweeping had been happening in the central district since December, but then obviously not the other districts. And so obviously the question was raised by me that if you're doing it 6 months there, why not do 1 month here, 1 month there, at least have some type of rotation, because we try to be equitable, at least some of the agencies do. So were you aware, I guess, through Clean Stat that was happening?
I was aware that there was a partial resumption of street sweeping. What we're looking at in Clean Stat is the performance of the services that are currently active and being delivered, decisions on which services are operating at a given time and at what frequency. That is a decision for the agency and for city leaders, but we're again keeping tabs on that and reviewing it and bringing the performance data into discussion so we can see how well those key services are actually being carried out in line with their scheduled and planned service.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I mean, we weren't aware, at least I wasn't aware that had resumed. It's actually unlawful for DPW to resume it in one area and not do it in an equitable manner across the entire city because they're required by law to perform that service. And so you can't pick and choose who you apply the law to and when you do. Some of our agencies have done that and ended up in consent decrees. But anyways, next up, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I had a question going back to the budget book. There's a decrease in your funding for this year. Can you, is that going to be an issue? Is that one staff person that's, I guess the first question is how many people do you have on staff? And you may have mentioned that before I came in, so I apologize. But then also that you're getting a bit of a decrease.
Yep. So maybe my budget colleagues can speak to that, the reason for that number. We're, seeking to maintain this, same level
of service.
Same level of service. In terms of that, where that number changed, we'll defer to BBMR to explain that number, but Yeah,
they were just savings across the city around pension, reduced contributions there.
Okay.
And so it was just universal kind of across the city savings there. And so most of their budget is around personnel.
Right.
And so with those reductions in costs there, that's what that's coming from.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks. It was just significant enough that I would have been a person or two.
I had the same question when I saw it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then could you tell us a little bit more about how you envision neighborhood stat and the neighborhood sub-cabinet working? In the past, I would say that well, let me just say this. There's so much going on. In one neighborhood, the strategies are going to be slightly different than in another neighborhood. And my understanding is that in the past, neighborhoods would get statted every quarter, which isn't enough, really. So how do you envision that working? Are you going to be, splitting the city in quadrants and working that way? I mean, how do you see the neighborhood sub-cabinet? Again, the way that it's worked in the past, I don't know that that's been the right way to do it. So tell me a little bit more about how you envision it.
Yeah, and increasingly, I think we will probably be moving away from the label neighborhood stat, because this is about the way we're now working, looking and working on it is around the data used within the soon-to-be relaunched neighborhood sub-cabinet. And so that's really...
The stat and the sub-cabinet, I don't think have been run very well in the past, so I'm just curious.
So the data component of that, of that process is going to be, again, focused on the DHCD and city kind of identified impact investment areas, and looking at data related to those particular areas. It'll rotate by, the focus of the meeting. So it will look at, not so much service delivery, but more related to, environmental conditions in the neighborhood, the sort of housing picture, including, kind of home ownership versus renters. So it's that kind of data that we're going to be looking at within that process. But it's not, again, it's not so much an accountability meeting in the way that some of the other stats are.
Right. So you're saying that they're starting with the impact investment areas. There are 7 of them, and we'll look at because there's been a lot of work already done in those areas in terms of what their plans are, et cetera. So I would imagine that you're looking at what the plans are, what the results that you want to see. And then along with, because they were the focus of the 30-day memo around the vacancies, vacant properties, I would imagine that you're looking at all of that, because the other piece of, if you're looking at just the impact investment areas, they're already getting a ton of investment, which is a good thing. I guess I just want to make sure that, we're tracking the right things. One of them is in my district. Full disclosure, and that it's based on, because the impact investment area plans are based on what's been done in the communities, and then the agencies and the communities are supposed to be following that plan. It's very much block level work that the commissioner has done as well. So I guess are there certain indicators that you'll be tracking that based on what the plans are, and then you'll obviously be integrating? I'm just trying to get a better sense of how this is going to work.
Yep. So absolutely, when you're looking at a particular impact investment area in the meeting, there will be a review of the progress towards the actual elements of the plan. That's less of what the OPI team is going to be.
Okay.
Working on. Again, we've been supporting some of the sort of quantitative data related to sort of different aspects of the economic investment and overall kind of neighborhood health. But again, the actual component of looking at the plans and the implementation of all of the activities related to those processes, that's something that DHCD and some of the other partners to this process will be kind of coordinating. But that will be a big part of that.
Can I ask that you also look at what the impact what I imagine are going to be the indicators around vacant properties. Also, relative to level of investment, like I need, and the city administrator has heard me say this before, the vacancy issue is a $3 billion problem. The work that we saw in the budget books doesn't have $3 billion in it. We are going to need some way to continue to keep accountability with what needs to happen in those areas. So you're going to have to do not just performance data and outcome data, but return on investment data and amount of investment data.
Yep.
So,
I appreciate that, and we will work with DHCD to find ways to track those types of measures, and totally agree on the importance of again those types of measures as part of this.
Yeah, I think I've been looking at a lot of numbers recently, but there's a document somewhere, and I will find it, that actually shows not just my letter that I wrote to the mayor's office, but that the commissioner had talked about, that this is a $3 billion problem. And that $3 billion is needed for investment. So, City Administrator, do you want to add to that? I saw you reaching for the microphone. I know they don't do well with glasses, sorry.
There we go. Not much to add, Madam Chair. I'll just say that we are scheduled on Monday afternoon to hear from DHCD. We'll certainly make sure that they're prepared to speak to the subcabinet. Considerable work has been done to prepare for a relaunch, including subgroups that have been working with communities and you and your colleagues. So I think they'll certainly be prepared to talk about impact investment areas. Want to also make sure that we're clear that OPI is doing more of a community profile and not necessarily focused on the sort of the housing piece of this. We are allowing the experts around housing to focus in on and speak to the investments that are being made and strategies that are being implemented around the housing piece of the subcabinet work.
Gotcha. No, I realize that neighborhood subcabinet is everything about neighborhoods, not just the vacancy work. That's just where my mind, where my mind is. Thanks. I'm good.
All right, next up, Conway.
Oh, you have no thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you stole my microphone. Must have a voice. How's it going, Director? Good to see you again. Good to see you again. I have a lot of thoughts and questions, really, and just to sort of better understand some of what you were alluding to earlier. You essentially said that the combination of the Office of Innovation and the Office of Performance Innovation actually technically resulted in a slight decrease of your budget over the last 2 years. Is right?
Yeah, so in fiscal 21, and BBMR, please correct me if I'm wrong, the city staff budget and the innovation budget were separate.
Yep.
In fiscal 22, that was the first time they were combined, and so that
Can
total,
you clarify for me what the Office of Innovation did as opposed to the Office of Performance and Innovation? Just to clarify the difference.
Yeah, so it's the same model. It's a team that is using human-centered design to work on particular challenges defined by the mayor. So again, the fact that we worked closely on developing this COVID communications campaign was a challenge area or an issue area that was deemed kind of important, and where that skill set was seen as critical to work on. So and again, that the process is, again, they're sort of, when you hear the word innovation, I think there's a lot of different kind of
It's a buzzword.
Perception. Yeah, quite frankly, yeah. When you hear the word, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. This is a particular human-centered design-oriented approach, which involves a lot of resident engagement and learning to inform some aspect to how a service is delivered, or in this case, a campaign. That's why I think this work with the Office of Broadband and Digital Equity is such a a good fit for the innovation team's approach, because there's a huge amount of complexity to that new service, and what the innovation team is really good at is thinking about the resident experience elements of this new service. So again, that's the design, that's the innovation approach that this particular innovation team uses. It's sort of human-centered, design-based work.
So effectively, your team or the administration would prioritize a project for which that team would work to help to resolve or improve.
Exactly. So they're working, and typically in partnership with another city, agency. So
Sure.
obviously the COVID communications campaign, that's a partnership with the health department.
Yeah.
In this case, we're working closely with the Office of Broadband and Digital Equity. So yes, it would be rare we wouldn't be partnered with a city agency on a particular area of, where there's a big issue or an opportunity. I think in the case of public Wi-Fi.
And as far as I remember, I think for both innovation and for OPI, most of your budget is staff.
That's
or
right.
If not almost all of it. Maybe
Correct.
that and computers, maybe. So it's almost all staff.
Yep.
With that reduction, what do we have by way of staff today?
So we're budgeted, including myself, for 13 city positions. That includes innovation, city stat, and the data fellows. I'll note we are currently hiring to fill a couple of those, so that is not our current staff side, but we're working. That will be that's the amount that we are budgeted for.
Okay. And how many of those folks are over city stat?
So for city stat, we have a deputy director, and we have 3 city government funded analysts.
I see. So 4. And did that change in the course of the last 3 fiscal years, or 2 fiscal years in this proposed?
Our head count has stayed the same, at least in terms of like what we're budgeted for. Yeah.
So I think I asked those questions really to understand the ability and scope of innovation and city stat to tackle operational issues, and of course special projects and big problems. There are no shortage. I think Councilman Slifer said it really well. You could throw a ball in any direction, in 5 feet, you're guaranteed to hit something that can be fixed. I'm really curious what we're looking at now. What are some of the things we're working on? I guess there are of course the 4 stats: kid stat, police stat, clean stat, and neighborhood stat. Or
Stat is, again, it will be forthcoming.
Sure.
There's also the coordinated inspections process,
Right.
which we've talked about,
And
in
prop
the
payment
invoice
or-
payment
yep.
review meeting, which as well.
So 4 to 5
five
stats.
five
with
things
one
that
coming,
we're
right.
calling a stat. Yes.
Right. So I see a great need across our city agencies for that data savviness, that ability to navigate their own data, let alone find their own data sometimes in order to tackle big problems. We can look at DPW, we can look at DOT, we can really go into any agency and find those opportunities. And I'm not sure if it's through the city stat process or through the innovation team, but I do see a great need there to help untangle problems across our agencies. I'm curious, how do we identify issues? How do we tackle those issues as an office?
So for always in partnership with our city leaders. Should I speak specifically to the innovation team sort of kind of selection? Because that is, I think that's an important one in some ways, because it's, when you select a challenge area, the team tends to be fairly dedicated to that particular issue area. So, there's a scoping period where we are engaging with city leaders, engaging with, to identify a sort of long list of potential projects. so there's sort of a scoping process to sort of identify what you might call like a long list of potentials. I totally agree. There is, so much opportunity on the types of things that could be worked on. And then we have criteria that we're considering, in terms of, a variety of factors, including whether it's a good fit for the team's approach, which is human-centered design. So to what extent is there a specific need or opportunity related to the way a service is delivered for residents that has an opportunity for just reform and innovation, where that, again, the resident experience part of that service is the key question. We also could be, in theory, working on some, internal city process that wouldn't necessarily be resident facing. That would be another way to do it. But ultimately, it's sort of a long list. We review it, against some of the considerations of what is a, kind of good fit project. And ultimately, we're working with the mayor and the executive team to kind of, decide. And, ultimately, we make a recommendation on what kind of is a good fit, but ultimately,
Sure.
We are kind of assigned to work on particular issue areas.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think in thinking about those opportunities and issue areas, you guys have a decent sized office, but not a massive office. I think one of the things that I think consistently is an issue across our agencies is communication and cooperation within our agencies and amongst our agencies, both within the city. And I think this is something I brought up to City Administrator Shorter in his presentation earlier in the week. But I think finding ways to leverage our data excellence and data capabilities to help address issues like closed means closed, I think it's a great example. We've been talking about that issue for years. We improve and then we get worse, and then we improve again and we get worse again. And I think we're in that kind of weird area now where I think we need somebody who can work in that sinewy area, as I think that's what I called it, in that sinewy area between agencies to figure out how to address those issues. Some of it's technological, some of it is relationships, but I think all of it sort of falls under the auspices and capabilities of the innovation team and certainly the city staff or whatever we feel is the best tool to address the problem. So I would encourage you to think about issues specifically between agencies when identifying options for the innovation team. I think that is all I have for now. I'll hand it over back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right,
Thank you.
Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you. So previously, there were discussions about data dashboard. I think about like a year ago. When you're talking about collaboration and integration of OPI and agencies, is that going to be reflected in a public-facing way or simply just internally via the agencies?
It's a great question. Thank you. So the city stat meetings and processes tend to be really internally focused. We're often getting into quite nitty-gritty details of operations in a way that is, the meeting is very, process-oriented, and again, the data is there to spark, to highlight issues and to spot opportunities for problem solving. So those tend to not be, products that are public facing. That said, you're right to point it out. There are a few things. There are public products we have produced. For example, again, this public tracker for the mayor's strategic action plan, which is again, a great way for the public to see how the city is doing, living up to its commitments related to that, hundreds of actions that are laid out for the first term. So there's that. I mentioned this 911 diversion dashboard. So there's our products that we sometimes produce that that are and can be public facing. The core work that we're kind of bringing into those stat meetings are not necessarily part of a public facing
Agreed,
dashboard.
yeah. And the only reason why I bring that up is, just kind of like external facing performance metrics that can be shared with the public about, simply how many cleanings we're doing, similar, one of the things that I do in the district is kind of report out every week how many cleanings we are doing across the district. And I think that's really important for the general public to really understand. And that sparks behavior change, because as you begin to see a particular neighborhood and they have more and more cleanings, they will begin to kind of right size themselves and say, why do we have these many, illegal dumpings in our area? Let's, as a community, be more vigilant. So the data is available, and it allows behavioral change collectively within the community. So that's an opportunity for you all as well, another public-facing way that data can initiate and spark behavior change collectively. My second question has to do with the process for feedback for the consumer survey. Has that been released yet?
So the point we're at in that process, there's an RFP out for interested vendors who would be the entity to actually conduct the survey, to bid. So that's the moment we're at. Yeah, one of the things we're going to be looking for in terms of like the review and consideration of that, the bids that come in for that is, what is going to be your process for a broad, equitable sample and response to the survey? Obviously, you can't survey all 600,000 residents individually, but you can find some different methods. And again, we're not the expert on, survey, outreach and engagement, but that is something we're going to be, reviewing and looking for in the vendor or vendors that are selected for that, because it's really the key thing. If we get some, skewed view of the city, I don't think we've helped anything.
And you hit the nail right on the head of where my mind is thinking about this particular survey. One of my concerns is one, how we can integrate this into already existing kind of modules within city government, such as your water bill paying system, or traffic. I mean, you may get a skewed. I mean, it's selectively as a survey. You may get a skewed view based on the agency in which you're kind of seeing that consumer satisfaction, but you are also taking the administrative burden off of the vendor, which i.e. is money, which we're integrating it into city agencies, so we have a constant iterative approach to consumer satisfaction. And to that point, and that kind of questions my concern about the 700. If we have 600,000 people that are represented in the city of Baltimore, I would assume that we would have at least a 10% margin within that, I would say, not even the 600,000, but at least let's get to like 25, 50, like really beef it up. 700 is not really a representative sample of the entire populace of the city of Baltimore. And then lastly, when we're talking about the integration of said data from those surveys, do you all have a timeline of when you'll be able to integrate those consumer satisfaction data into city processes in real time?
So I think we're looking at, all said and done, kind of later this year, when we'd have, late in the calendar year, that is, when we have results from this, from this survey. The results, will be public, and so all that data will be, again, available publicly, but also, then starts to inform, new measures that we can utilize both in this forthcoming set of performance plans that I referenced, but also in our stat meetings. And it's, I'm, again, as the person who, gets excited about, those types of things, it's just such a great opportunity, because it's a new way of, or an added way of gauging how successful services are being delivered, right? I mean, you can look at, timeliness of the closure of SRs, but again, this will help us to understand, resident perspectives on that.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, just as a survey developer myself, not solely focusing on just kind of like the verbal, but make sure you're integrating pictorial aspects as well. When we have a 6th grade literacy level in the city of Baltimore, we want to make sure that we're capturing all of our constituents, whether they be multilingual, whether they reading or not. We want to make sure that we're collecting their satisfaction level, just not those that are academically inclined.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Councilman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up to what we had talked about earlier, are those community profiles that you're going to be developing would be available to the public, to us?
Right now, they're really going to be for use in the in those neighborhood sub-cabinet meetings, so they're not meant to be like a public product in the way that a dashboard, a public dashboard is, but it is something we can look at potentially in terms of like formalizing that. And
Yeah, because right now you're developing the baseline, right?
Right.
And then eventually we want to see where things are going. As my colleague was saying, it's a great way for folks to really understand where we're headed and what we're doing. So, and particularly for those of us who actually have impact investment areas in our districts, we're part of all those conversations. I know that the neighborhood sub-cabinet is an internal agency working, and I do get feedback from the agency. So, but I think we should all be on the same page with that data profile. So if we can get those, that would be super. And at some point, they would be dashboards. Would be great.
thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Councilman Conway.
In shifting and going through the budget, of course, this is under the mayor's office, and so we don't have any data.
Yeah, we've got no metrics.
No data, no metrics. I was curious, as the metrics guy, do we have metrics for which we measure the success of the office and the various components of the office that we look at or that you consider?
Yeah, great question. So I think the different parts, so, we don't in the sense that they're not in the budget book, but I can talk about how we sort of think about that. So, for the innovation team and the data fellows program, it's really dependent on the project, right? So, I can't, at the start of a year, it really depends on what the team is working on. So there are going to be success measures related to, resident experience at the public Wi-Fi locations, right? Because that's the project they're working on. That's like the way we would think about a success measure for the innovation team. Data fellows, it's a little more about the sort of, if they're building a dashboard, the timeliness and, kind of, usefulness of the dashboard that was produced. For CityStat, as I think the two things we look at, which are, that in terms of like how do we measure our success? First of all, I think the extent to which our city leaders are actually using the process as a management tool to manage those issue areas and make decisions around those issue areas that we're holding stats for. And again, I think we're in a really pretty positive moment in that respect, given the level of engagement, for instance, that we see from the mayor in our police stat process. So that the fact that he is, utilizing that process as a genuine performance, performance management process is there's that piece. The other piece we look at, which again is a little hard to quantify into a number, but Councilman, you will remember well from your days, in stat world. We want to see that the data and analysis that we're mobilizing in those meetings is spotlighting issues that challenge agencies to make operational or strategy changes. And those can be kind of bigger or smaller things. But again, when we come out of that police stat meeting, we want to see that some things we've highlighted are sparking, maybe it's a review of a certain process of how this activity is conducted by BPD. So it is those types of process changes that are kind of surfaced, that is really, I think, the other thing. So leadership, kind of usage, and process, shifts that are happening. Now, again, we haven't put that into a basket indicator. It's something we could potentially look at. Again, I think it's a little more quality, not quantity, when it comes to that stuff. It is, also, Councilman, as you know, notoriously sort of thorny to sort of measure stat contribution to to an agency's service change. But I do think it's some important point.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind that I think would be helpful, and I think this also for City Administrator Shorter when we think about how we're getting the best juice for the squeeze out of the STAT program, out of OPI. Looking at return on the investment, I think the councilman's question earlier was an excellent one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Making sure that we are more than earning back what we put into the program, and I'm sure we do, with those data insights, those regular check-ins with agencies. Two, I think looking at one of the sort of bread and butter pieces of the STAT program has always been 301 and making sure that we close our SRs on time. But then two, I think as we developed and learned more, realizing that we were satisfying people with the closing of those SRs, because we then found that agencies were closing out SRs and doing so errantly or incorrectly, or there are a number of reasons why folks would close out SRs and say it's done and it wasn't, which led to the whole closed means closed issue. So I think those are some of the kind of bread and butter things that, in my previous experience, I think were really helpful in understanding how much we were or were not helping agencies through issues. Now, I think, of course, given a small team, you're going to focus on only so many stats, only so many agencies, and therefore only so many SRs. And I think that may be something for you to kind of narrow in and think about what that looks like for you. But I think, when we get to these questions about the return on the investment and whether or not you're improving agencies or helping agencies think more strategically about resources and how to resolve issues, I think we have to answer that question. What the heck are we trying to accomplish? And then what does success look like there? And then work our way backwards to figure out whether or not we're moving toward that success. And so I encourage you, I want to make that a follow-up. I encourage you, and that doesn't need to necessarily be something, this is of course within the mayor's office at the moment. So develop performance metrics that show us some term of success for even given projects that we can speak to, so that when we come in next year, we have more definitive answers to those kind of questions. But then more broadly, for the longevity of the program, I think it would be helpful for us to think about what the return is that we're looking for from the program, so that we can always kind of look back and say, hey, this is how we've been doing, and it's either getting better or it's not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you very much, Dan. We are now in recess, and we will resume at 6 p.m. with the Office of Emergency Management. Thank you.